Good afternoon, friends. Welcome to today's reading of Hope. Let me scoot over a little here so I can sort of get in the middle of the camera. These little things happen. So, yesterday we only got about halfway, a little more than halfway through chapter 10. And so today we're going to finish up chapter 10, and then we will hopefully get through chapter 11 today. I'm not, again, going to do more than 30 minutes, but I think I should get through the last chapter and then chapter 11 in 30 minutes today. We will see. All right. So just picking up right where we left off. Excuse me, on page 93 if you ever do get the book. That night, they camped in a large patch of grass next to the river. The grass was high enough that the members of the company were not visible when they lay down, all except the mighty prior, whose torso showed above the grass like an island in a green sea. The next morning, Alva was shaving by the river. The sun was not up yet, but it was light. Some in the company were still asleep, and some were waking up. Philor was cooking some sausages and fried tomatoes for breakfast. He had a way of combining the flavor of sausages and tomatoes that made both better. It smelled delicious, and those still asleep were having sweet dreams of the coming meal. Hope was one of those who were already awake. She had noticed that Alva shaved about every 4 to 6 days, which she thought was odd. Why not every day? But she had never asked him about it. As he finished shaving, he put his straight-edged razor back in a little leather bag, and then pulled out a pair of iron scissors from the same bag and began to trim his hair. He was looking in the river as a mirror. He had not cut his hair since before the beginning of the journey, and it was getting a little longer than he liked. He would want it short when they traveled through the hills. Hope approached him from behind. He knew she was coming by her footsteps. "You cut your own hair, Mr. Alva?" she asked. "Alva is fine. And yes, I do." "Oh, would you like me to help you?" "You know how to cut hair?" "I've read about it. I think I could." "Well, if you like," he said, handing her the scissors. She seemed to know exactly what to do and set to work with no hesitation. As she cut, she continued to make conversation. "Why don't you shave every day?" she asked. "Seems like a waste of time. I don't like beards because they can get in the way, but I shave long before my stubble starts to annoy me." "You look younger when you shave." "Ah, you think I shouldn't hide my handsome face, eh?" he said teasingly. Hope blushed slightly. No, I mean, yes. I think Nebra thinks you look better when you shave." Alva smiled again. "I don't think Nebra thinks a lot about me one way or the other." "Are you in love with Nebra?" she asked. "No, I don't think so." "Then why do you talk to her the way you do?" "I've left off doing that lately," he replied. "But why did you?" she persisted. "Well," he said thoughtfully, "I like her a lot. Nebra's a very powerful lady, and since the day we met, I always felt like she had the edge on me. I don't like people to have an edge on me, so I thought I'd balance it out by talking to her like a girl instead of a queen. I didn't exactly realize that was why, but I think that was it." "Kind of selfish, don't you think?" Hope asked in gentle reproach. "Whoever said that Alva wasn't selfish?" "Nebra did." At this point, Hope put the scissors down. She had finished Alva's trim. She had also captured his attention, and he turned to look at her. Hope continued. "She said that a man who faces 5 armed soldiers to protect a farmer who has nothing to gain, or when he has nothing to gain, is not a selfish man. She says you act the fool because you don't know your own quality." "She did she?" Alva said with a grin. "Oh my," Hope said, putting her hands over her mouth like a child who had just said a naughty word. "I wasn't supposed to tell you that." "Don't worry, beautiful," he replied with a slight wink. "It'll be our secret." Hope glowed nervously. She had never kept a secret from Nira, but she was too embarrassed to think of telling her that she had told Alva. "Okay," she said with a shy smile. Alva looked at his reflection in the water. "Well, sweetheart," he said, "that is the best haircut I've ever had. Thank you." "You're welcome," she said. Alva turned around and saw Nira watching them from some distance away, but she did not look angry. She was smiling sweetly. Alva had never seen her smile so sweetly. Hope stood up, said goodbye, and walked back to Nero. "A man can always fall in love," Alva chuckled to himself. Perhaps all was not lost after all. Chapter 11. First Sign of Trouble. 5 days after Alva's haircut, they passed Calvern. Alva, Philor, and Pensor led the horses several miles back into the city to sell them. As Alva had anticipated, they generated quite a bit of commotion. They claimed to be horse traders who, after making their sell, planned to take a vacation for hiking and fishing. This was not a great story, but it was the best they could do given the circumstances. They had to sell the horses at a bargain price so as not to take too much time, but this would not concern the wealthy Hellel. The local horse trader had 2 strong donkeys, and he included these in their payment. Then they bought a boat from a local fisherman, which was big enough for 4 men. He was hesitant to part with it, but they paid him well. They harnessed the donkeys side by side and skillfully fixed the boat over their backs. With this done, they led them out of the town. All eyes were on them, which made them very uncomfortable. But, as Hellel said, it couldn't be helped. They had not brought large weapons because they wanted to avoid looking too much like warriors. They only had daggers hidden in their clothing. If they were confronted by armed men, and that seemed very unlikely, Alva could get a sword for himself easy enough. His keen eye was disturbed by the way one man in particular looked at them. He was a tall man with a long black beard, and he had a look of interest more than curiosity. Alva pretended not to notice him. What could be done? Luckily, they were able to cross the river and begin their walking journey without a hitch. The morning after they crossed the river, the company put on their weapons and wore them openly. Danger would only increase as they approached the Karagan Hills, and they had to be less worried about attracting attention since they were moving away from civilization. The brothers Chad and Shinar each carried their short bow in their left hand and put a quiver full of arrows on their back. In addition, each wore a medium-length sword on their left hip. Keel, Pensor, Philor, and Hellel also carried a medium-sized sword and a shield thrown across each of their backs. Bonson also carried a sword and shield, but his shield was larger to match his frame. His sword was a large, 2-handed broadsword. Few men could handle such a sword with only one hand, but Bonson was such a man. His sword had gold lining on the hilt and looked magnificent, although some of the men thought it was a trifle gaudy. Prior also wore a large 2-handed broadsword on his hip, but for him it looked like a medium-sized sword. He could have put both of his gigantic hands on it only with difficulty. Across his back, Prior carried a large, double-edged battle-axe. It was doubtful whether any other man could wield such a weapon in battle. Tombus carried his small, one-handed axe in one hand, and also had a shield thrown across his back. Jagrok carried a medium-sized sword on his hip and a long mace in his left hand. The mace also doubled as a walking stick. Alva wore a short sword on his back where he could reach it with ease with his right hand. The length of the blade was from an average-sized man's shoulder to his wrist. It was broad at the base of the hilt and gradually got thinner until it curved off at the tip. In addition to this sword, Alva wore a long dagger on his right hip. The blade of the dagger was about the length of an average-sized man's elbow to his wrist. Alva's father had taught him how to use almost every weapon of war in existence, but these were his preferred tools for a skirmish. They were quick and mobile for close-quarter fighting against multiple opponents. As the men put on their gear, Hope saw something she had never seen before. Nera took a sword belt out of the baggage and put it on her waist. Her sword had a long blade that was very thin and pliable. Alva also noticed this, though he was not surprised like Hope. His father had taught him about almost every sword in existence, so he knew the make of hers. It was not the kind for cutting off limbs, but if properly controlled, it could split a mosquito or pinpoint a particular vein in a man's arm or neck. It was a fine sword and suited Nera well. Hope wondered how Nera could be a sword woman without her knowing it. She put it together quickly that Nera must have practiced her sword on the walks when Hope did not accompany her. When they were suited for any battle they might meet, they began walking in the direction of the entrance to the trail, which Alva had selected. Alva offered to lead the company, but Hellel thought it better to keep things as they were. Alva had shown Jagrok the route on a map, and Jagrok continued to lead the company. Tombus was at his side, and the map was in his hands. When they stopped to rest, Alva, Hellel, and Jagrok would take counsel together, and Alva would explain where they were going next, as well as he remembered what to expect. As usual, Hellel brought up the rear of the company. He insisted that Alva walk with him so that they could discuss the route and possible contingencies. Bonson was somewhat sulky about Hellel's seeming preference for Alva, but he said nothing. He tried to stay as close as possible to Hope, who, with Nera, walked just ahead of Alva and Hellel. This way, the bulk of the company could protect Hope from any danger in front, and Alva and Hellel would provide protection in the unlikely event of a surprise attack from the rear. As the company approached the hills, the ground grew dry and rocky. Their entry place was through an opening in a small cliff at the edge of the hills. Approaching the cliff, Alva felt uneasy. It would be easy for someone to observe their approach from the cliff without being seen themselves. Like so many things on the journey, this could not be helped. Dangerous as though this route may be, it was the safest available without going too far from water. If they ventured further south, there would be no bandits, but also no water. Dying of thirst was not worth 10,000 pieces of gold, and it certainly would not help Hope. As they traveled toward the cliff, Alva became less as they traveled toward the cliff, Hope became less romantic and more realistic about their journey. There was sure to be fighting, and who knew how many men might attack her cherished warriors. At one rest, by a small stream running down from the river, she asked Alva a question. "This is going to be very dangerous, isn't it?" She spoke softly, and he could see that she was afraid. He had never seen her afraid before. "Yes, it is," he replied. "But don't worry, we won't let anything happen to you." Alva was unsure whether it was completely honest to say this so confidently, but he was sorry to see Hope afraid and wanted to provide comfort. "You promise?" she asked. "I promise," Alva replied. "It's worth 10,000 gold pieces to me." Hope looked hurt when Alva made this statement. "I'm just teasing," he said. Hillel hired us by promising each of us a fortune, but if any of us had met you beforehand, we would have taken the job just to hear you sing. We'll keep you safe, all right." Hope smiled glowingly. He had made her feel much better. "I hope I'm not proved a rotten liar," Alva thought. When they left the stream, the way toward the cliff became a gradual ascent. On Alva's request, Hillel called Chad back to speak with them. "Chad," Alva asked softly, "if a target is still, can you hit it by sound alone? Say, for example, you hear a man who is talking, but you can't see him." "Yes," Chad said matter-of-factly. "As you know, there might be a lot of factors involved, but I can pinpoint a target by sound from some distance away and hit him if he is not behind something. If he is, depending on the distance, I can shoot an arrow up and, like a rainbow, come down on top of him." "Perfect," Alva said. "The moment we see any trouble on the path, I want you to have an arrow on your string. Pay attention to anyone not part of our company who speaks. If I say, 'Now, Chad,' bring him down immediately. Understood?" Chad was taken aback by Alva giving him an order, but he looked at Hillel, who nodded approvingly. "Understood," Chad replied. He then went back to his place in the company next to Shinar. They got closer to the cliff, and the closer they got, the steeper the ascent became. The trail wound up in switchbacks toward an opening in the tan rock face. The trail had many loose rocks and was very slippery. Once Hope lost her footing and fell backwards, but Alva caught her and put her back on her feet. Hope had never lost her footing before, and it shook her up quite a bit. "Careful," Alva whispered. "We can't have our hope shattered on the rocks." "Thank you," Hope said, glowing shyly. Nira smiled at Alva over her shoulder. "Well, at least our trek in the hills has a good beginning," Alva chuckled to himself. As they entered the opening, they had to walk in single file. The passageway went on narrowly for some time, always ascending, and the rock walls on either side stretched high above their heads. At last it began to get wider, and the ascent became more gradual. After some time, they came to the end of the passageway and continued on the trail. It was nice to get away from those walls, and everyone breathed more freely. It would be some days before they reached the large plateau which was at the top of the hills. Until then, most of their journey was uphill. Hope began to feel tired, but she said nothing. She would stop when the warriors stopped, not before. After a while, they reached a small pool of water and stopped for a rest. The water was somewhat stale in taste, but Alva said they must drink up and fill their water skins to the top every time they came to water. This route should have regular water stops, some of which were natural springs, but no one ever knew what might happen on the trail. After the rest, they resumed their journey. Periodically, Jagra would look at Alva from the front. Only their ears were sensitive enough to hear an occasional sliding pebble in the distance. This was the movement of some animal, but one could not be sure. Eventually, there was a slight break in the ascent, and the trail led through a small pass between two large rocks, the other side of which was a bowl-shaped dip. Alva did not like descending into the dip by a blind entry, but there was no other way to go through unless they did some serious climbing. At least half of the company did not know how to climb. This had always been his least favorite part of this particular trail, but they had to go through it. The bowl was surrounded by some large boulders and thickets that formed a half circle around the two rocks at the entryway. As they passed through the rock doorway into the dip, all was silent, but something felt wrong. Suddenly, Alva shouted, "On guard now! Form a circle around Hope!" Of course, Hillel did not give this order, but the men obeyed instinctively. Something was clearly happening. Hillel said, "Alva," signaling him to take control, and "Do whatever Alva commands, men." All was silent. The men stood on guard in a circle facing outward with weapons erect. Hope, Nira, and Hillel were in the center. "Travelers," a voice called from beyond view, "I have 200 men here. Lay down your weapons, and we will let you leave with your lives." "There are no more than 50, Alva whispered to Jagrok. Jagrok nodded. Alva responded to the man. "You wish us to leave?" "We wish you to give us wealth," the voice responded from behind the thicket. "Lay down your weapons, and we will let you leave with your lives. We will only take your weapons and valuables. We will even let your 2 women leave." Hope shivered at this last comment. Though she did not know why, she felt it betrayed a danger she had never known. "Men," Alva whispered quickly, "in a moment, these men will either leave or rush down on us. If they rush, kill them." He then addressed the voice again. "You say you will let us leave with our lives?" "Yes," the voice responded. "Can't you—" At this moment, Alva said, "Now, Chad." Chad's arrow whistled and the voice was cut off with a groan. As Alva had predicted, the bandits rushed down the bowl at them, and the warriors rushed out to meet them. Nira remained with Hope in the center, and Hillel joined in the fight. There had been 46 bandits initially, but Chad's arrow had made that 45. Even leaderless, the bandits still assumed 45 on 11, attacking from high ground would make a sure victory. They had never imagined a group of warriors like this one. All the warriors fought beautifully. This was Bonson's first experience in real combat, but he rose to the occasion and received only a small wound on his left leg. Pryor's battle axe cleaved men with mighty swings. The keen eyes of Nira and Hope were able to observe much of what transpired. What especially caught both of their attention was Alva. To Hope's untrained eye, he looked like a tornado of blades turning every which way, with bandits falling in his wake. Nira's trained eye noted that Alva's every move seemed perfect. On the loose, rocky ground, he never lost his footing once. His blocks and parries were perfectly angled to glance away enemy strikes while keeping unnecessary pressure off his wrists. His strikes were perfectly placed to inflict severe damage or instant death. This was no brawl in Bracia. Alva was fighting to kill. His moments were simple rather than flashy, but they were all fluid and deadly swift. His arm motions were solid chin to create the openings for his sword or dagger to pierce an enemy's defenses. Nira had seen battles before, but she'd never seen anything like this. Very few had. The battle did not last long. At the last moment, one bandit slipped past Shinar and lunged at the ladies. Nira's thin sword pierced his heart, and he was the last man to fall. All had fought magnificently. None of Hillel's company had been lost or even wounded that seriously. Pryor and Bonson had each killed 4 men. Besides Alva, everyone else had killed between 1 and 3. Alva had killed 11. Of course he did not share this, but some of the men knew that he had been there to relieve the pressure on them at a critical moment. After the battle, Nira and Hope quickly patched up the men's wounds before they went to a safer place for rest. All the men had taken wounds except Alva. He didn't have a scratch. Perfect, Nira thought. There was nothing magical about Alva's fighting. It was just pure technical perfection. Pensor had received a nasty gash on his right shoulder. Hope bandaged it, and when she touched his shoulder, Pensor noticed that the pain subsided significantly. Whether her sweetness played a trick on his mind, Pensor did not know, but his wound certainly hurt a lot less than it should. When they were all bandaged, they moved on quickly to find a safe place to camp.